What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel today. Let's get started. 16 facts about Julia Tyler, the most controversial First Lady of the 1800s. Julia Gardiner Tyler, the second wife of President John Tyler, existed prior to the revolutionary Eleanor Roosevelt and the glamorous Jackie O. Despite the fact she became First Lady in the 1800s, a stifling and oppressive era for women. Julia Gardiner Tyler was bold, brazen, and fabulous. The wild side of Tyler's young bride was much gossiped about, but rather than letting the headlines dictate her life, Tyler dictated the headlines. She branded herself into the first celebrity First Lady through her opulent and dramatic lifestyle. She was the opposite of modesty in a time where women were meant to be modest to the core. Wild stories about Julia Gardiner Tyler make her one of the most scandalous First Ladies in history. She was a strong, self-sufficient woman who did as she pleased. These facts about Julia Gardiner Tyler and her unconventional life might make her story even more interesting than that of her husband. She scandalously posed in a handbag ad. Julia Gardiner was regarded as a very attractive and spirited young woman when she was younger. Since she came from a rich Long Island family, she was highly regarded as a prospective wife for societal bigwigs. But Gardiner made the wrong kind of headlines in 1839, when she secretly posed in an advertisement for, gasp, clothing store for the middle class. For an upper-class woman to model in a newspaper ad at all was completely inappropriate and unheard of at the time. Her parents whisked her away to Europe to avoid further damage to her reputation. She was labeled the Rose of Long Island by a secret admirer. Adding to her scandalous reputation, someone anonymously wrote an ode in honor of Gardiner to the paper, which forever dubbed her the Rose of Long Island. Again, this type of exposure of a woman in the news was unacceptable at the time. It was essentially the modern-day equivalent of getting your naked pictures hacked and released on the web. She had a slew of suitors and was a known flirt. Gardiner never had any trouble winning the affection of prestigious men, despite her reputation for scandal. Among her romantic dalliances were a German baron, a Belgian count, bachelor and future President James Buchanan, and married future President Millard Fillmore. Gardiner was up for it. Her father had to rent an additional room to entertain her and her sister Margaret because they had so many suitors. Adding to her sex appeal was her reputation as a flirt. At the time, her explicit indications to potential suitors that she was interested in them was unheard of, and her parents were reportedly mortified by this. She refused to marry John Tyler for years. President John Tyler became infatuated with Gardiner almost immediately upon meeting her. He even chased her around the living room furniture in an attempt to kiss her. In 1843, just 5 months after the death of his previous wife, he made his first proposal, which took place at the White House masquerade ball. Gardiner enjoyed flirting with the president, but found him to be too old for her. He was 30 years her senior. Despite his position, Tyler was an unpopular president who had only took on the role after the death of William Henry Harrison. Her parents did not pressure her to marry him because he was not particularly wealthy either. Tyler was undeterred, however, and continued to propose to Gardiner and publicly woo her for the next year. She survived an explosion on board the USS Princeton. In 1844, Gardiner and her family were among the notables in Washington who attended the christening of the USS Princeton alongside the president. The ship had the largest cannons ever built for a boat, and during the cruise, the guns were fired in a right. One such blast misfired and exploded on the ship, killing 6 passengers including Julia's father, David Gardiner. Distraught over the death of her father, Julia Gardiner found support and kindness in John Tyler and finally fell in love. At least according to some versions of the story. Her family's finances became precarious as a result of David's death, and the marriage became the most secure option for her to maintain her status. At first, she was attracted to John Tyler's son. When the Gardiner family was first invited to dinner at the White House, Julia Gardiner had her eye on John Tyler Jr., the president's son, a handsome flirt who wrote her poetry. She continued a flirtation with him for some time despite the fact he was married. He planned to divorce his wife, but Gardiner eventually moved on to greener, or rather grayer pastures in the way of his father. When Gardiner initially met the president, it was as a prospective daughter-in-law. She slipped away from the president in secret. Imagine the scandal today if a recently widowed sitting president up and eloped in secret with a woman 30 years his junior. That's exactly what happened in 1844, and people, reasonably, went nuts. Tyler and his new missus rationalized their secret nuptials by saying they were mourning Gardiner's recently deceased father. Only 12 guests attended the ceremony at the Church of the Ascension in New York, but news broke almost immediately. Huge crowds gathered to catch a glimpse of the newlyweds, and reactions were understandably mixed. John Tyler was 30 years older than her. When Gardiner married Tyler in 1844, she was 24 and he was 54. Gardiner's mother was 9 years older than Tyler, and Tyler's first daughter was 5 years older than Gardiner. While Gardiner was initially turned off by their age gap, her youthfulness delighted Tyler. He was a soft-spoken traditional Southern man while she was an energetic and wild pot-stirrer, and apparently opposites eventually attracted. Her stepdaughters hated her. Despite the fascination surrounding the new First Lady, not everyone was keen to jump on the Julia train. At first, the 3 oldest daughters from John Tyler's previous marriage detested their new stepmother. Tyler had previously stated he had no plans to remarry, and they viewed the sudden marriage as an insult to the memory of their mother. While Mary and Elizabeth Tyler eventually warmed to Gardiner, Letitia Tyler never did. Gardiner took over hostess duties that were previously hers, and had a close emotional bond with Letitia's estranged husband. She adopted royal traditions in the White House, including ladies-in-waiting. Though her time in the White House was brief, less than a year, Julia Gardiner made the most of it. Inspired by her time in Europe, Julia adopted many royal traditions for herself. One of them contained her Vestal Virgins, or ladies-in-waiting. The group of women, who all wore matching white dresses, surrounded Queen Julia when she held parties or hosted guests. Julia called her time as First Lady her auspicious reign, and she often wore elaborate gowns and headpieces. She was the first photographed First Lady. Gardiner was good-looking and she wanted everyone to know it. She posed for oil paintings and had copies of her likeness dispersed and sold, making herself the first celebrity First Lady. So when photography first became accessible, she eagerly posed in the studio of photographer Edward Anthony. Despite the fact that she was the First Lady to be photographed, her image was not widely distributed or mainstream like her portraits. It's surmised this is because her painting portrayed her as plumper, and therefore showed her in a more flattering light. So, basically the old-school version of Photoshop. She arranged for the newspaper to write only nice things about her. Gardiner was so determined to make a name for herself that in addition to selling engraved copies of her face to the public, she basically ghost-wrote newspaper articles about how pretty she was. Gardiner struck a deal with reporter F.W. Thompson of the New York Herald, promising him full access to all of her social events so long as he wrote rave reviews of her looks, style, and parties. That's exactly what Thompson did, referring to Gardiner as the Presidentress or the President's Bride, and focusing more on her beautiful features than on her social life. These pieces were so over the top it's possible some of the articles were actually written by Gardiner's brother, Thompson's close friend, as per Julia propaganda. She rode around in a coach with 8 Arabian horses and loved making a grand entrance. Never one for subtlety, Mrs. Tyler was adept at making an impression. She frequently rode around Washington in a specialty coach pulled by 8 white Arabian horses. For her first public stroll, she decided she needed an Italian greyhound by her side, so she imported one from the consul in Naples. She even once showed up late to a ship christening at the naval yard, wanting to ensure a fabulous entrance with lots of attention. Polka dances were named after her. Gardiner was well known for her love of dancing. She frequently held lavish White House soirees where guests would dance the polka and pop bottles and bottles of champagne. Gardiner was of course known for dancing a bit too closely with people who weren't her husband, the president. And when she was asked for permission to use her name on sheet music known as the Julia Waltzes, She of course agreed and set about publicizing this information.